we can. Okay, awesome. Um, this event is being put together by the Public Interest Law Association and Criminal Law Association. I mean, Criminal Law Society. Sorry, Criminal Law Society, and we just wanted to give students an opportunity to speak to attorneys who are currently working in or have worked in the criminal law field. So Sierra is president of PILA, so if she wants to give a few words, you can go ahead.
Sure. So I would like to thank, first of all, our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules and giving back. That's something that at the Public Interest Law Association we really appreciate and honor that. And we would also like to thank our students who are here, who have also taken time out of their busy study schedules and et cetera, to be able to come listen to all the wisdom that I know these panelists have to offer us. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it back to Farhana to start the next step of the panel. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sierra. So we're going to have questions lined up, a few questions, general questions for each panelist, and then afterwards, we'll hand it off to anyone from the audience who wants to ask a specific question to anyone or a general question that works too. And we'll have our own questions ready if no one else wants to chime in. So for the questions, it'll be me and Yasmin are going to alternate questions to the panelists. And I guess we should go in order just so that in a certain order so no one feels like they're interrupting the other person. So in my screen, I kind of see ADA Tochka first, and then Professor Bloom, and then Attorney Richardson. So I guess if we can go in that order, that works, just so that everyone gets a turn and no one feels like anyone's getting cut off. So yeah, we'll just get started. I first wanted to give everyone a chance to give their introduction, maybe just their name, where they currently work, what school they attended, just a brief intro so everyone kind of gets an idea if you didn't read the little blurb that we had sent out earlier. So ADA Tochka, if you want to go first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alyssa. I am an assistant district attorney with Suffolk County. I am currently in the Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation Unit, and I graduated from BU Law in 2015.
Thank you. And we'll hand it off to Professor Bloom. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I'm sorry, that was my fault. Hi, guys. My name is Elisa Hockman Bloom. I practiced as an assistant federal public defender in the Middle District of Florida for 7 years until 2020, when I became a professor. And I did appellate work, primarily a tiny bit of death penalty appellate work, and I continue to take appointed federal indigent cases. And I teach criminal law and criminal procedure.
Thank you so much. And now we'll hand off to you, Attorney Richardson.
Thanks, Farhana. Hi, everybody. My name is Jasmine Richardson Russian. I am a recent graduate of New England Law, actually 2020. I work as an assistant public defender in Prince George's County for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. I work in the juvenile division, so I represent young people who've been charged with both misdemeanors and felonies. So I work primarily in the juvenile and adult courts, but just handling all of those cases. So yeah.
Thank you so much. So we'll get started with some of the questions and we'll take them all in order. So the first question we have for everyone is, can you describe your post-law school journey? So maybe in law school, what you were interested in, and then what took you to where you are now?
Same order? Okay. So I knew I always wanted to be in the Suffolk DA's office. So I tailored my internships to basically be in every single unit I could get in so that they were forced to hire me because I wouldn't leave. I would recommend that if you have a place you definitely want to go to, I would intern there as much as you can. And I would try to intern in different units so different groups of people see you. And it helps you kind of discover what type of work you want to do. So I interned in the appellate unit. And I thought in law school I hated legal research and writing because the topics in law school are so mundane. But then when I got to the DA's office, I was doing appellate work and I thought, wow, this is actually pretty cool. And I actually loved it. And then I interned in the courtroom in the Boston Municipal Court, and then I loved that even more. And so it was good to see the difference, the different paces, the different units, the different types of work you can do within the office you're hoping to get into. But if you are unsure where you want to go, my best advice, I think, is to intern with a judge. I think that was the best experience I've ever had because you gain the insight of the judge. The judge lets you watch the different proceedings, then he or she will talk to you about it. I saw medical malpractice proceedings, and I thought, wow, maybe I should go with the it definitely broadened my view of what I wanted to do and what I thought I would be happy doing, because that's the goal. Everybody, make sure you pick a career where you're happy doing it, because as you all know, being a lawyer is grueling. So interning with a judge and then interning in the place where you want to eventually land would be my key things I would focus on. So I did that. I interned with judges. I interned in the DA's office, and I did clinics, which I thought, in trial advocacy class, which I loved because it puts you on your feet before your classmates who aren't going to judge you because they're in the same boat as you. So it makes you feel a little more comfortable before you go in the real world. And you're in a courtroom with people who are 10 years your senior, and you're just learning how to address the court for the first time. So I think trial advocacy is a great course also to take. And then I went right into the DA's office right out of law school, and I've been there ever since.
I thought that was really good advice.
Yeah. We're also going to get into other questions when it comes to like advice. So I'm really excited to hear what other advice you guys have for us as well. Professor Bloom, if you want to take, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I'm going to try to not repeat the things that I thought were excellent advice, because I thought that there was really excellent advice about getting as much substantive practical experience as you can during law school while you are, like, I think that, even if you think you want to be a PD, getting advice, getting an externship with the Suffolk DA is getting experience working for a clinic or for an externship as a DA is still extremely valuable experience. My path was a little bit different. I had a ton of loans, so I went to work at a law firm for a few years. I then moved for personal reasons to Florida, and I clerked for 2 judges. So that's a little bit similar. And each of the judges, I was able to see so many things. I saw all the different types of law that I wanted to practice and not practice. At the law firm, I didn't practice anything but sort of like write memos for the partners and did very little of my own practice or representation. When I clerked for those 3 years, it was 2 years for a trial judge and 1 year for an appellate judge. It became very clear to me that I wanted to represent criminal defendants. The 11th Circuit covers Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. It is the most severe in terms of sentencing for federal defendants across the country. It sentences at a rate that people, even prosecutors in Massachusetts would be astounded by the rate of incarceration in terms of the federal government in the 11th Circuit. So it became very clear to me when I witnessed and saw the types of sentences, the types of trials and pleas in the federal system that I wanted to be on the defense side. And I was lucky that once you sort of broke into the federal litigation group in Tampa, even though I was, like a Northeasterner living in Tampa, once I broke into it, it was a really excellent environment for working. A lot of collegiality with the AUSAs, that's the prosecutors in the federal system. It's a small courthouse by Boston standards. Everyone who works there. I was able to appear eventually before both of the judges for whom I had clerked. It's a smaller legal community. And I loved appellate work. I didn't in law school. I wouldn't have predicted that I loved appellate work, but I found it really, really interesting. But the best federal public defenders or state public defenders will tell you that they are still getting experience in the trial court. They are accompanying the real trial PDs to their trials, to their motions, to their hearings, to see the on the ground work to the extent that they can. And the writing and the research is stuff that I loved. In fact, the reason I became what I am now, which is a professor, I began writing when I would lose horrible on-bank cases, on like horrible losses that you carry with you. And then I would write law review articles about those cases that I had lost and clients that you can't reverse what happened to the client, but you could write a little bit about the law and the law reform and why this appellate procedure was wrong. And so that is, those all came from my interest in appellate advocacy, in public defense, and in particular in criminal sentencing in the federal circuit, which is quite severe by basically any context.
So my trajectory is a little different. I knew going into law school that I wanted to be in the realm of juvenile justice. I knew that that was, definitely where I wanted to be, but I didn't know if I could handle it emotionally. So I went into law school thinking that maybe I would do, some type of transactional law for my 9 to 5, and then be, I believe in Massachusetts it's called a court-appointed attorney. In Maryland, it's called a panel attorney. So I would pick up cases from the public defender's office just to, fuel the passion that I have for without burnout. So in order to make sure I could really do that, my first summer, I ended up being a law clerk for the public defender's office that I now work at. And by the end of the first week, I just knew that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so it just kind of, it switched in that respect. So I did it for the summer going into 2L year and also going into 3L. At the end of my second summer, our district public defender sat me down and was like, you should apply for the attorney position. So once I got back to school in the fall, I ended up applying for the 3L hiring position. Professor Siegel helped me with my interview. And, we went over all of the things that, PD's offices are looking for. And I got an interview around, I would say, October of my 3L year, and then was hired in November. So I kind of, had that lined up before graduating. That took a load off of everything. But yeah, I went in initially thinking that I wouldn't be able to handle it. But then being in the work and being surrounded by attorneys that, had that sense of urgency to, protect people that looked like me was just super inspiring. And it made me realize that was something that I could also do. So yeah, and here I am 2 years later.
Thank you for all your answers. We're gonna go and get into the second question. I think Gaz has.
Yeah. Okay, so I know Jasmine, you just pretty much answered it, but it's a little bit of a repeat, but what interested you in this aspect of criminal law? And then let's just do the same order again, please. Thank you.
I wanted to be a prosecutor because I think you have the opportunity to make a huge difference in the lives of victims and in your community. And I like that as a prosecutor, you have the power in every case to have discretion on how you are going to handle that case. For example, my first 3 years were in district court. Many cases are not as serious as, they're not as serious as when you get to Superior Court. So in district court, you have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the defendant, tailor your sentence recommendation as to how you can help this individual. What is the issue? What is causing the problem? If they're homeless, connecting them with service providers. I was always big into bringing service providers into the courtroom so they can meet with the defense attorney and the defendant, so that, because otherwise, if you recommend go to a service provider, they might not make it there. So I always was big into bring people, community providers, into the courtroom. Here's the person to meet, whether it's the defendant or the victim or a witness. This is the person, they're interested in your services. They sit down, they make the connection, they exchange cards, and then they can develop a relationship that way. So as a prosecutor, you had that opportunity to say, I'm going to recommend probation and I'm going to recommend this program, and we're going to track to see how you're doing. And if you complete that program by the end of the year, then maybe you won't do the full 2 years, you only do 1 year. So you could really tailor how your sentences were based on the crime. Or if it was an individual who did, a heinous crime, you could say I'm going to recommend the maximum sentence because of what you did and based on what your record is. So I like that you had that power, whereas a defense attorney, no offense, all due respect, but they would say, could you give my client probation? They would ask, yes, I and then in superior court, I deal with human traffickers, human trafficking victims, and I deal with children of sexual abuse. So I always liked the idea of being the voice of a victim in the courtroom, being able to stand up for individuals who have been sexually abused or physically abused, and to be able to fight for justice on their behalf. I always thought that was very empowering. People are very nervous entering a courtroom, as lawyers are as well, but they're very nervous, and you get to stand up and be their voice and hopefully get a fair and just outcome in the end. Thanks.
I would agree that I think, and again, I'm going to not answer the question right away. I'll answer it right away. But absolutely, the prosecutors in the system have a tremendous amount of discretion. And when that discretion is used well, as Ashley, I'm sorry, I forget your last name. It's not on the screen. Just said, it is a tremendously powerful tool in our system and helps promote the best prosecutors are like so critical to our system and working together. I guess I came at it from another perspective. I believe that we have like a highly over incarcerated country compared to any other modernized country in the world. I think we have, when you see up close the length and severity of sentences, particularly in the federal system, not as much in Massachusetts as in other places, but in the federal system, it is wild the amount of incarceration we have for nonviolent criminals. And so I came at it from the perspective of believing that that was pretty unjust, and also that our federal prisons tend to not be rehabilitative in any respect. And so we're sitting with by far the highest incarcerated population and systemic injustice in the system that we know. And I felt that it was a much more natural fit for me to be representing someone who as their voice in a courtroom. And ultimately, I guess the most frequent question I get asked is, how does it feel to represent guilty people or people who are guilty? And the truth is that as a federal public defender, most of the time, because the feds pick and choose their cases, there's no mandate. You pick and choose what you want to prosecute. The defendants are often guilty of some version of what they're for the indictment or the charge. They're almost never guilty of the fullest, most maximum extent of their information or their indictment for what they're charged, or for the highest end of the very severe sentencing punishments. And I was just very compelled by the severity of the system and the carceral state, and the clients really lacking an opportunity to fight that in a real way. So that was what motivated me to be a federal public defender. I think the frustration is exactly the opposite of what my predecessor just said about the discretion, right? You lack discretion in many cases. Now, prosecutors in the federal system are combating severe mandatory minimums, so they lack some of the discretion, particularly discretion in the lower level crimes that you were just describing. So some of them would argue that they operate in a system with a lot less discretion because of mandatory minimum sentences in the federal system. But I was just compelled and continue to be compelled more by the public defense and the opportunity to advocate on behalf of many people for whom the system has failed, our system in many respects, both structurally, educationally, socially, and I continue to be compelled by that.
I agree. And just to piggyback a little bit off of that, I grew up in the county that I'm now representing my clients with. I have 4 older brothers, 4 older Black males. So I've seen how the criminal justice system works a lot different for them than it does for a lot of people who are currently on this screen. I've had to sit with that helplessness all of my life until I couldn't do it anymore, which is why I'm here in this position. There's a certain amount of a bottomless pit that you feel when you see somebody that you care about walking away in chains, or you see someone that you care about handcuffed for a broken tail light. It's maddening. And those are things that you have to already be cognizant of just growing up Black and understanding that the system doesn't work for you. But, you know, in doing this work and allowing myself to use that as fuel and not compartmentalize it, that creates the why for, you know, the reason why I continue to do this and the reason why I want to continue to be able to sustain in doing it. The system does not work the same way for everyone. A lot of people are more likely to be either wrongfully accused, either wrongfully convicted, or to plead to something that they know that they didn't do in its entirety because of that. And so knowing that and learning more and more about that as I grew up, you know, seeing it firsthand, it really makes you think, well, how can I help, or what can I do? And you know, that's why I'm in the position that I am. And I hope that I'll be able to sustain and be in this position for as long as I can.
Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, so our third question, I wanted to thank you all for sharing your stories and perspectives. And for this third question, I think we're going to go back a little bit to what we were speaking about before when it comes to advice. And it was, what did you benefit from the most in law school that helped prepare you for your current role? So I know 88 Tochka was mentioning taking a trial advocacy class and things like that. Was there anything else that you think helped prepare you or helped you the most to the kind of attorney that you think you are today, or vice versa?
When you do your internships, I recommend that you get the most out of them. There's a couple different ways you can do an internship. You can kind of just, you know, do the bare minimum, which is what a lot of people do, because law school, you got so much work to do. You need to get out and get back into the library. But there's another way you can do it, is that you can tag along basically with any lawyer who's willing to let you tag along. And a lot of lawyers, you know, all lawyers were in your shoes once, so they recall what it's like to be a law student intern. And if you tag along with the ones who are willing to let you come along, you get to learn invaluable experience. When I was interning in the DA's office, I second sat, I think, 18 jury trials. And I just, and I didn't do anything. I mean, I just sat there in the chair, and I ran and got the paper from the copy machine if they needed to run and get an exhibit real quick. But that experience made me much more comfortable in the courtroom when I was the one that was in the first chair doing the trials, because I knew where to stand. I knew where the witness goes. I know what the clerk does for. You just feel more comfortable when you're there in the moment watching it. And the lawyers, most lawyers love to be mentors to law students, and they will take you under their wing. And there's so low stakes as an intern, no one expects anything out of you. So if you sit there, and I think one time the lawyer said to me, "Do you want to stand up and do this?" I'm like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." But it's good because the judge was laughing. They're like, "Okay, good job, you said your name." But I mean, it's good to get that out of the way as a law student than to be doing that during in your career. So that's what I would definitely recommend, is find people when you're during your internship who's willing to let you shadow them, whether it's in the courtroom or whether it's in, you know, anywhere really, in a meeting. I went to some meetings where then you learn, you meet new people who then can help you down the road. So definitely, you know, expand your wings when you're doing your internship so you can get the most experience out of it.
I agree with that. I think that it's easy as 88 Tochka, is that correct? How do you say it? Yes. It's easy to see the internship as like the easiest class that you have of your classes throughout a year, but it's easily the most important. And I would say that even if your experience, and for most of the students here at New England, they might be doing a clinical or an externship in an area that's not necessarily where they're going to practice or where they want to practice because it doesn't exist exactly the internship they want to do. But trial experience, for example, but in-court experience is still going to be really valuable to you as an employer, even if you don't get as lucky enough as an attorney Tosca to basically be in the same office where she was going to work right before she worked there. I mean, that's the best. And, you heard that she was able to work in all the divisions and expose herself to those units. But for a lot of people who are either practicing somewhere else, you should really seek that in court, and I agree, or in chambers experience to the extent that you can, because in a way that's even more important and more valuable than the classes. It's something that can translate, again, even to a different specialty in many ways, because if you've had the opportunity to prepare a motion and argue it, or to stand before, to represent a client, if you want to be a prosecutor and the externship that you have available is one that's a defense externship, that doesn't mean not do it. It means do it. I think, it's really impressive when I used to meet before I came here, students who had met with clients in prison, for example. That's something that first-time public defenders, it's usually sometimes their first experience having gone to prison. But there's lots of opportunities where you can go to a state jail or a prison or lockup and see what it's like to represent someone at a bail hearing at a small event. And so these are opportunities that you should seek out to the extent you can, and connections. I think that this is probably in any sort of career advice, is to continue to make connections. I always say to students and to colleagues who are public defenders that all lawyers, for the most part, like to speak about themselves, and they like to mentor, and it's much better to go to them with questions as opposed to an ask. So when you ask someone a question, when you ask them for a job, you're asking them for a job. When you ask someone for information about their path or thoughts and ideas, you're more likely to get a broader response of ideas, a broader opportunity, and that just opens doors. So I always recommend going to people and emailing professionals who have the type of job that you're interested in with questions about them and questions about opportunities, but not with no ask, but just to learn more about opportunities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to pretty much say the same thing. Ask a lot of questions, but also don't be afraid to tag along in various points of their trial prep and experience. If you want to be a litigator or you think that that's something that you're interested in doing, maybe ask if you could shadow them from the top of the case to create the case theory all the way until the trial. If you want to get better at research and writing, ask them if they have any issues that they're thinking about that you can maybe collaborate on a motion for, just make sure that you are as inquisitive as possible, because in that you also learn a lot. When I first got to the public defender's office, I knew I wanted to, be in litigation, but I also knew that I wanted to make sure I knew how to build a case, because that's, completely different. So I tagged along with as many attorneys as I could in various points of their trial prep to understand the mechanics of it, so that, if that is something that you ultimately want to do, and you may learn that you may not want to, but in inserting yourself and allowing yourself to learn and ask questions and really get a feel for it will definitely help. And also making connections with your professors and speaking to them outside of class. I had very good experiences with my criminal professors where I got to talk to them about the aspects of the practice that we don't learn about, the emotional aspects, the how exhausting it may be, having to wear multiple hats, because when you're a defense attorney, you're also like a counselor. You're also, you wear so many different things and you have to be everything to everyone, and learning how to manage that before you get into it and you're, hitting the ground running and then completely burning out. So yeah, don't be afraid to be inquisitive, and make sure that if you are still a little unsure about what exactly is your niche, try everything and be very active in trying that. And, hopefully you'll be able to find where you can specialize in.
Thank you so much, guys. I know that's definitely very helpful for all of us. The next question, can you describe a particularly challenging part of your job? I know there's probably plenty, so you can go on with as many as you want.
In the district courts, I think the most challenging part is your caseload. As an ADA in a district court, you are carrying about 400, well, in the Boston Municipal Court, you are carrying about 400 cases, which is, beyond manageable. There's so much work to do on every single case, and you can't. And you have to learn how to triage, which is very difficult because every case deserves 100% of your attention, but you just cannot do it. So it's very challenging to learn how to choose which cases you're gonna spend more time on, and which cases you just cannot spend more time on. So that and if you're somebody who's joining a prosecutor's office, you probably all have passion and you just want to keep going and going and going, and you burn yourself out. And I remember my first 3 years in district court, people were staying in the office until 9 o'clock at night. So you're there from 7:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night because you know there's the next case, and there's so much to do, and there's so many people to call, and witnesses and victims and service providers. You just can't do it all, and you have to accept that. And learn how to triage as best as you can. But I think that's what's most challenging, especially I think anywhere in the criminal world, is the caseload. Caseloads are high, and you're dealing with very serious situations for everybody involved, and you have to be, on your game at all times. So that's what I found challenging. But over time, I assure you, you will be able to figure out how to, make sure you are paying attention to the serious cases. But I just found at the beginning that was overwhelming as to how to handle 400 cases a day. And it's just
odds is something that clients often really want to know once you establish trust with a client, which can happen in a short time or a long time, depending on varying personalities. And it's a really important part of the relationship. But communicating how little the chance of success is on appeal is extraordinarily hard. Explaining for most people the limits of appellate procedure is really hard. So there's certain things that you can't fight once you've lost them at the trial court level or once you've pled guilty. And in many cases where the guilty plea has come with sort of stipulations to which the client was not particularly attentive or the attorney was not particularly attentive, they're stuck with them on appeal. And it's really, really hard to fight that. In the 11th Circuit and in the First Circuit, there are written plea agreements that include a lot of limitations on the right to appeal for various sentencing enhancements. And it's really, really hard to communicate to someone that even though they saw their trial attorney fighting something and losing in front of the judge, and it was clearly a dispute, I can give an example in a drug conspiracy, whether or not they deserve a minor role. A minor role would bring down their guidelines from, let's say, 75 months to 65 months. So that's an example of an enhancement that would bring down your guidelines by 2 years. And you're allowed to fight it in front of the trial court, but if you've pled guilty, you're not allowed to fight out an appeal. So you've seen your trial attorney argue this in front of the judge and get close but lose, and communicating to the client, well, we're not going to be able to re-argue that, even if the case law is on our side, even if for all these reasons. And so I think communications with clients and that, when it's the end of the road, it's the end of the road on appeals, and that's really hard to handle for someone, particularly someone young, particularly someone with children on the outside. It's extraordinarily hard. And there's never a time it becomes less hard because, of course, you're having these conversations from the freedom of getting back to go home to your own home every night. So that never becomes easier.
Yeah, I think for me, the emotional aspect of the job is the hardest. I represent kids. And my kids are charged with very serious crimes. If they were in adult court, and some of them are in adult court, potentially go away for a very long time. And having to sit with that is sometimes it can be debilitating. I always say this, it's never really about the crime. And even for kids, even especially for kids, it's really not about that. There's so many things that happen in a child's life that create the why for why they do things that are completely beyond their control. Things like access to adequate education, things like history of abuse, neglect, things like addictions in their families. And all of those things tap into and create the person that they become before they even have a chance to decide that. And so, there are times where I close my laptop and I'm like, they really don't care about my kid. Like, they really don't. And having to sit with that, but then get up the next day and do the exact same thing, have to have some type of boundary set, or you're gonna lose it. But like I said, I love this job, and so being able to sustain is the most important thing. And so I have to, use that perspective, but also use that as fuel to go that much harder, to really put, the prosecutor's feet to the fire and make sure that before you do anything to my child, you make anything beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes.
So in the district court, you had no life. However, the people that you work with became your family. So that I think was very important, is that your colleagues were doing the same thing you were doing. So, you have to stop and go get dinner together. I mean, it's very important, as Jasmine was just saying, that it's your fuel, but it's also like taking everything out of you, but you're doing it in your life that are most important to you. So I would keep your hobbies, keep your friends, keep your family. You have to rely on them, and you have to rely on your colleagues, because like Jasmine said, you're doing a job that it takes so much out of you that in order for you to do that job, you have to be able to have self-care, because you cannot do it the next day if you're not taking care of yourself. You will burn out, and then you'll try to get a 9 to 5 job that you stare at the wall and do nothing all day because you're so burned out of the job that you were so passionate about. So you definitely need to take care of yourself in order to keep the fuel going.
Yeah, I like what you said about learning those habits in law school, because I'm seeing it now more as a professor too, that some students, and I remember I was in law school 15 to 12 years ago, they would study endlessly, because many traditional students in law school, not a lot of adult or evening students, but traditional students in law school, if they don't have other responsibilities, can do endless amounts of studying for one particular thing and teaching themselves the habits of, in finals period, I'm never going to lose the lawyer. I'm never going to leave the library. I'm going to be, like, I'm not going to shower. I'm not going to go running. I'm not going to take care of my family. I'm going to go on this crazy thing. And then looking back at that period of life, for many people, that's the time at which they have like the least responsibilities. First of all, these are classes, not people and clients, and actual cases. But second of all, as life goes on, you become, in many cases, with more responsibilities. And so I think a good practice to begin practicing in law school is how to work hard and efficiently. For people who already have tons of caretaking responsibilities or job responsibilities outside of law school, that comes more naturally. We see that with a lot of my current students. So the best is to sort of learn this practice. And again, I've never had a caseload of 400 cases or anything even close to that, but to learn the practice of working really hard when you're working and then cabining that when you're not is very difficult, but it's something you can start in law school, right? Like you should not spend 150 hours preparing for a midterm in crim. You should not, I don't know if any of my crim students are on this. I don't think so. but you should learn how to effectively spend your time, and that, it's easier said than done, but law school is a good opportunity to try working on that, because the stakes are actually, they don't feel like it, they're a little bit lower. And I had some good role models. I think that's another thing too. I think it's really important as people become bosses in an environment to model balance and boundaries. And so I worked for 2 federal judges that could have worked all day, every day, and all night, and still not finished every, pro se petition from jail that they received. Every single complaint, every single habeas petition, and every fact. They could have worked for 100 hours a day, never finished them. They each modeled a tremendous amount of work-life balance, where you work efficiently and hard in the hours that you're dedicating to work. And I think I try to emulate that to the extent that I can. And again, I'm becoming a law professor, which is not even comparable to either of these 2 women's job or course load.
Yeah, I did not have work-life balance my first year at all, because district court sucks. It's like it was the best worst experience in my life. But I was working sometimes, 7 days a week, sometimes 12, 14-hour days, going to court, pushing, having back-to-back trials, sometimes back-to-back-to-back trials. And, it's not, even though it helped me get to the position that I'm in now. Once I got in this position, I had to take a really hard look at boundaries and how to be able to safely do that, so that I can wake up the next day and give just as much as I did the day before. I'm still pretty new in this position, so I'm having to give myself grace a little bit, but having set cutoff times, having time where you focus on the things that will be there when your job isn't. You may love your job, but it may not be there tomorrow, but your family will be. You care about, and also prioritize being able to sustain. If you love your job and you care about your job, you're going to want to do it for as long as you can, but you can't do it for as long as you can if you're hitting full throttle every single day, not giving yourself any time to replenish. My grandma says, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're spending almost the entire day doing something, working towards something, by the time you actually get to do it, you're already exhausted. You might have studied, you might have knew your cross-examination questions from the top to the bottom, but you're going to miss something because you're exhausted. And your client's not going to benefit from that. You're not going to benefit from it. So you really have to set clear boundaries and make sure that you prioritize you. And in that way, when you are your best self, then you're able to advocate for the people to the best of your abilities. But you can't do that half-cocked.
Thank you so much. That was really great advice. I think it kind of will also touch upon our next question, which I think speaks to, since this month is Women's History Month, and we intentionally chose all female attorneys for today's panelists, I kind of wanted to get your experience as a female attorney, maybe any imposter syndrome you might have felt in your role, because I think this month you hear a lot of stories coming out where women are like, some people are in disbelief that women are attorneys, and it's just like, it's kind of strange, like hearing about that still happening in 2022. But if you can maybe touch on that, maybe your experience, good or bad, in that respect. And then after that question, we'll open it up to the students if they have any extra questions to ask, because I know it's getting close to 6 now. So.
I think the biggest thing I tell fellow incoming female lawyers is to speak up. And I'm the worst at this, but when you're especially when you are in the courtroom and it's your case, you should be the first one on the microphone, because if you are not, the male on the other side is going to be the first one, and he's going to speak for you. And that always got me so upset when the other side, especially a male, attorney, anybody, but especially male attorney says. And I think what she's going to say on the other side is this. I'm like, wait a second. Let me talk. And then sometimes if it's a male judge, they'll start answering, ruling on the motion. You're like, wait a second. Hey, I'm in the courtroom too. And especially if you're a short woman, like God help you. So you definitely have to speak up, speak boldly, speak confidently, because you know your counterpart is going to speak confidently, whether they read that case or not. And you probably have read the case over and over, and you highlighted it to the 10th degree, and you know it well, so you should speak up. I know that women tend to, you know, I don't mean to generalize, I should say myself, but you're not as, sometimes you're a little nervous that even though you did do your research, you're a little nervous that you didn't do it to the 100th degree, but sometimes the other side hasn't done it at all, hasn't even opened the case. So you should feel confident if you did your research to speak up, speak first, speak loudly, and speak confidently. I can't stress that, especially in front of juries. If you've done your job, if you've been up all night preparing for this trial, then you go in the courtroom and you do your thing. Don't be shy, because that's like a second nature for us to do that. And thankfully nowadays so many more women are entering the legal field. You have your girls behind you and they'll be there for you. And girls like to rely on others, which is great, sisterhood. So I think that's important. And then in the end, once you become that boss lawyer, turn around and help the next law student who's graduating get there too, because that's the most important thing in this field, because it gets overwhelming. You get depressed, you get sad, you get frustrated, everything happens. And when you have each other there to help you, that's a big deal. You can't get through this alone.
I liked all that, especially the turnaround and help other people. I think particularly so in the appellate work, you're not arguing in front of juries, you're arguing in front of judges. And for the most part, appellate judges, with some changes, are older, and they are predominantly male, they're predominantly white males. And that is changing, but your arguments are made in front of the judge. And in the early days, still exists a lot of feeling about particularly young looking women, and some sort of lack of confidence in what's going to happen, what the argument's going to look like. And while recognizing my own, I think, tremendous privilege, first of all, in how I look when I appear in front of a judge, I have been cognizant many times in what a judge is thinking about me over the past 12 years in terms of my age and my sex. I've also had 3 babies over the past 7 years. And so I think that a lot of times there's being pregnant in court, which is frankly something that, judges notice and other lawyers notice. And that's something that is part of biology and part of my life, and not something I necessarily want to talk about during an appellate argument, but clearly has come up. And so navigating that, I think, requires confidence in knowing who you are, your preparation, like repeated understanding of the reason why you're there. In my case, I'm there on behalf of a client. And so it becomes easy to realize that whatever sort of feeling the judge has about me, my advocacy is on behalf of this client's life, and this client's life and amount of years that they're going to spend behind bars. But this is not avoidable. Being cognizant of your sex, and if you become a parent or if you experience pregnancy, is certainly something that is a part of my experience. And so learning how to look inward, see confidence in yourself, and be reaffirmed by your purpose, which is, working on behalf of the Commonwealth or on behalf of your client, which is the purpose. It's not ultimately about what they think about women or what they think about me.
Yeah, I get it as a woman, and I also get it as a Black woman. There have been multiple times where I've been mistaken as a defendant or the mother of a defendant. It used to really get to me, but then I realized who I was. I'm a naturally scrappy type of person. And so I realized I'm a Black attorney. I have long locks. My hair is big. I will be almost 6 feet tall, and I'm going to speak. I'm going to speak loudly, and I know my stuff. So the more that you doubt me, the more fun it is when I get you so angry on the witness stand. So understanding who you are is so important in this job, especially as women, because we have this thing where we can be distracted by all of the outside things before realizing that everything that we needed to be in the room, we walked in with. And so I keep that, energy when I'm in there, and I keep that energy even in the courtroom when I'm stomping down the halls, because I need you to know that I mean business. I need you to know that what you're not going to do is run all over me. You can't, look how tall I am. It's just certain things like that. Know who you are and understand that regardless of what happens in the courtroom, because there are things that are outside of your control, but everything that you needed to be successful, you walked in with. So it's really about owning that and being able to keep that with you, regardless of how people look at you or try to speak for you. And don't be afraid to correct them, or don't be afraid to say on the record, no, Your Honor, I would like to make my own record for the court. Or no, Your Honor, I do not need a translator. I'm all set by myself. And, rely on that girl power, because it does exist, and it's absolutely powerful if we, muster it up and use it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for all of your answers. I loved all of that advice, especially the being loud part, because that's something I've been struggling with in law school. So I know a lot of other people are probably in the same boat. But I kind of wanted to open up the floor to any questions from students. If you have any, I think either just unmute yourself and ask is a good way to do it. So if anyone has anything, go ahead. Anyone?
I just wanted to say a few words. My name is Carlond, and I'm the Vice President of Public Interest Law Association. So I'm really glad that all of the speakers came out today, especially Alyssa. I think I recall some of your work with the Children Advocacy Center. So I'm glad to see someone locally, coming out for that as well. I wanted to know if you could touch a bit more on, you kind of did mention it earlier, kind of your different career paths and how you got there, but for maybe some of the upperclassmen, 2Ls in particular, what is the key time and moment that you think students should be, if they want to become like you, if they want to be a prosecutor or a defender, what is the key time to start kind of bunkering down and getting their stuff together so that they can apply for jobs and secure something?
If you're going into your last year and picking your schedule, in my humble opinion, do not pick classes that are going to kill you, because that's when you want to be going out applying for jobs, having coffee with mentors, making connections. Some of my colleagues, I remember they took tax, corporate tax. Do not do that to yourself. I think your GPA is very important. I think the easier classes will help you. But I think in terms of your last year is really important to getting out there and making your decision as to what type of job you want and making connections so that you're in a better footing when you do the interview. So definitely lessen your load. Pick classes that you are interested in. I took American Indian law, which was fascinating, but it was not corporate tax law. I mean, take classes that you will enjoy and that they're not going to kill you. So that way you can focus on getting out there and applying and meeting people and doing as many coffee dates as you can as a law student.
I agree. And also just to echo that the classes that will be easiest for you are the ones that you're actually interested in. So there's a lot of I should be taking corporate tax, for example, and there's no should. There's what will be easiest for you is what you're actually interested in. You always do better in classes you're interested in than the ones you think you should take. And the experiential opportunities, they have to be prioritized. Exactly what Alyssa said at the beginning. They cannot be where you do the bare minimum. They're actually the most important, because they are, again, even if it's in family court and you end up wanting to be in juvenile justice in the PD's office, that supervisor in family court can speak to your court experience in a way that your professors can't. So don't blow off any sort of in court or practical experience that you can, even if it's working in a nonprofit or whatever you're doing as an extern or in the real world, that will be important for future job opportunities, even if it's in a different field, is what I'm stressing, because those skills really translate. So don't blow that off to the extent that you, in fact, the opposite, focus on that.
Yeah, definitely. Try to get as much experience as possible. I would say start thinking about it the summer going into your 3L year. And then once you know you're back in school, or even before then, really start to hit the ground running. Make sure, like I didn't, take a lot of heavy classes my 3L year either. So I wanted to make sure I had, as much marketable appeal, as possible, because it is a competitive job. So definitely get as much experience as possible. And that way, once you're feeling yourself around about what you want to do, you can kind of have an idea of it going into your 3L year. So you can really start to look for things tailored to that.
Thank you. That is really valuable information that I could have used last year, seeing I'm a 3L now and still looking. So, is there anyone else who had any other questions for our panelists? Just anyone want to ask anything, or you can direct it to any panelists as well. No? Okay, if not, I have a question for ADA Toshka. I think this was something we had prepared in advance, but I wanted to kind of ask about progressive prosecution and how, I don't know if you've been seeing a difference between how it's handled in district court or in appellate court, but basically what steps do you see in your day-to-day work that may signal or help you see that to reduce incarceration rates?
I think the biggest area has been, I think from when I was an intern and then from when I started as a DA, was how we treated substance abuse, just purely possession of substance abuse. That's been a much more focus on seeking, getting them into programs that fit, because there's what we have learned, as everybody knows, is that there's no one path to recovery for substance abuse, and jail is not always the best option. It might be as a last resort. We have had people overdosing in the courthouse and you didn't really have an option at that point, but you should hold them pending getting them into a good program that can treat them specifically. So I think that substance abuse has definitely been a change. But since I started, I'm happy to report that since I started in the DA's office, we've always been treating possession of substance abuse as somebody who needs to be having treatment, as opposed to recommending committed time. But I think I've always found that fascinating, the different approaches you can have for individuals who are who have substance abuse issues, whether it be Section 35s where you are holding them in a facility, or whether you are recommending them into certain programs and then try again. But definitely substance abuse as a treatment, because luckily Massachusetts now has a lot of hospitals that specifically handle substance abuse and trauma-related issues, which often go hand in hand. So if you can recommend them into a program where they can develop and then go step to step to step so that they don't relapse, that's the best option. So I think substance abuse has been a major focus in the criminal justice system recently.
Okay, does anyone else still have any questions? Anyone want to ask anything to the panelists? Because I know it's 6 o'clock. I think we may have some people who need to leave for class and whatnot as well. So were there any other pieces of advice or anything that any of you specifically want to give out to students? I know especially Professor Bloom, who already is a professor with us, I might have some words, but anything else for students who are maybe debating which side of criminal law to join, like defense or prosecution, not to pit you against each other or anything, but maybe that might be you might have some insight for that.
For public defenders in most offices, including the one here, typically if you're going to the trial division, you'll need several years first as a state PD. And so getting that sort of trial experience, it's very unlikely that you'd be hired. It's unlikely that you'd be hired straight from law school. Any sort of experience clerking for any judge in a criminal court would be really good experience before becoming a public defender. And it is common, and my own path where I worked in private practice for 2.5 years and then clerked and then worked as a public defender is also typical, particularly if you're going to end up working in appeals. Appellate public defense is totally different than being in the court every single day in trial court, and it's very different skill set. And so most offices, PD offices, will take some recent graduates, but also people coming from clerkships. We lost you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we lost you. I just have to prepare for my evening class tonight soon, so I have to sign off.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that was basically our last question, but I didn't know if EDA Tochka or Jasmine had anything to add to that, but if you do, go ahead.
I think for state defense and state prosecutors, often it's individuals who go right in from law school, but I agree with Eliza for federal defenders and federal prosecutors. Sometimes you go to a law firm and then you transfer into the U.S. Attorney's Office, and same with federal defenders. So I think your question, Emily, is if you want to be a prosecutor or defense attorney later on and you want to make some money before, that is an option. You can do that. You can really do anything. I've seen it all. And sometimes law firms allow you to do like a special 6 months as an ADA. I'm not sure if the public defenders do that, but you can do a 6-month rotation while working at a law firm to see if that's the job you want to do. So it gives you some trial experience. But last thing I just want to say is, as a law student, feel free to, I can give my email address if you're interested in an internship in my office, or if you want to apply to my office, I'm happy to answer questions. You can shadow me. But definitely, I think the biggest thing as a law student is like, just annoy everybody as much as you can to let them shadow you around. Really, we're here to help. And like I said, we were in your shoes, so we're more than happy to do what we can to help you out.
Thank you so much. I know some of us have to go, so I'm gonna end it here for everyone. But I think if I think you have to leave, you can leave. If you can stay for a few more minutes, I think there was one more question in the chat, but I know Professor Bloom, you might have to go for class.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
You're
guys.
welcome. Thank you so
And
much.
Here in New England, you know where I am. I'm on the 4th floor. So,
Yeah.
thank you. Take care.
Sorry. There was one more question that I missed in the chat, so I just wanted to make sure we covered that, but didn't keep Professor Bloom for too long. It was from Emily. It was, how often do attorneys come into prosecution or defense after practicing elsewhere for a few years?
Emily, I think I touched on it a little bit, but if I didn't answer your question, let me. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't think either of you two, in terms of a career choice. I think you both are very dead set on where you want to go and what you want to practice. So it's an interesting question on this end. But yeah, if there's anyone else who had a question, I don't see anything else in the chat. And I think we're good. But thank you again so much for both of you being here and taking the time to, out of your busy schedules, to come and help students with advice. So I will be sending out any contact information if you're comfortable with me sending that out to the students in an announcement later after this. So I will get that from each of you after and send that out. But thank you again for everyone else who came out and took the time before class or after class to attend. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.